I was going to do a thing where Nick made me small in post, like Ant-Man, but then I remembered I don't have $1 billion for VFX, but this is games that scale well.
What's up, everybody? My name is Nick.
I'm Mike.
We are the brothers Murph, and yes, this is me top 10 games that we think scale well. So what that means is that it plays well at all different player counts.
Yeah.
So these are going to have 2 to 4, or like sometimes like 1 to 6, or sometimes even more kind of crazy games.
I think Friday scales well because it's a solo game. You only play it with one, and it's good at doing that.
It is good at
Scales?
doing
Is that the premise?
It's a game about scales. You're weighing things, right?
Oh, man, hang on. We have Takeno scales. There are. I was gonna say there's a game for everything.
There's a game for everything.
But yes, these are games that will they morph themselves or they do different things so that they appeal at all player counts. Which is not always easy to do.
They just work. Yeah, a lot of times like, oh, this game is 2 to 4. You should really play it at 3. It's best at 3. Or the last list we did was the games we thought were best at 2. And those games might scale okay, but we think these are 10 games that scale really, really well. Also, this is not the only 10 games we're going to talk about. Over on our Patreon, we're going to have a supplemental, another 10 games, 10 more games that scale really, really well. So if you want to check that out, make sure to subscribe over on our Patreon. We appreciate it. It helps us pay for our careers and our lives and everything.
The camera that you're watching us on.
But nonetheless, that list will be over there. But let's get to number 10.
Number 10 is Nick's favorite game of all time.
It is. Parcheesi. Scales
underrated.
Now, this is viticulture, and viticulture really can be the spot for like many, many different Euro games. Because in viticulture...
Or like a lot of big worker placement games.
Yeah, about a big worker placement games, where in viticulture you are running a vineyard, but it's a worker placement game where you have your workers, and you're putting them out onto the main board in spring, summer, fall, and winter, especially with the expansion, and you're doing those things. And in a higher player count game, on each spot, there's 3 different spots to place them. And in a 1 to 2 player game, you can only place them in the leftmost spot.
So every action space can be activated by one worker. You can always use your grande and stuff. So yeah, it just creates...
Whereas 3 to 4, then there's 2 spots for each spot. And then 5 to 6, there's 3 spots for each. So it just means there's more spots. And a lot of worker placement games do that, where it's like, hey, these are shut down because, or in tile placement games, like, hey, take out these tiles.
Sure.
If there's, and so they scale themselves like that. There's a lot of different games. My favorite's viticulture, so we put on the list.
Yeah, and I also like that with viticulture, you don't actually have to like put like overlays on the board, which I don't like love always. It's just like, it's easy. It's all printed on the board constantly. So you don't have to do anything. It's just, remember, if it's a 3-player game, the first 2 are available. So it's nice and easy.
And there is some difference because, at least in the expansion, some of the spots have bonuses on them.
And they're all kind of placed different.
And they're kind of placed in different spots. And so, and then on top of that, there's also some of the special workers will use spots in other player counts. So like they definitely do it in a lot of interesting ways. But viticulture scales really, really well. 1 to 6 plays very, very well. It'll have to be a longer game at 6.
Of course.
But no, it scales really, really great, as do a lot of kind of dry Euro games, which we love.
Number 9 is Wonderland's War.
I wouldn't have called this.
This is why This is why I wanted to put it on the list. This is an area control game and kind of a push your luck game. Yeah, it's a battler game where you are fighting over territories within Wonderland, because everyone's going a little bit mad right now.
do.
And you're playing as like, the Mad Hatter or
Alice,
and stuff like that. You're going to battle and stuff. So one thing that's like really great is like area control games, things where there's gonna be conflict tend to be better at higher player counts. And this is like a, a 5-player, up to 5-player game. And of course, like it's gonna be a big raucous time at 5-player. But really one thing that got us for this one is when you play it down to 2-player, which you would expect, I don't know if this game is gonna be really great like that at that kind of player count, actually works really well.
Yeah.
Because you get more cards in those Tea Party phases to get kind of more supporters out onto the area. You play, I think, with 1 less territory.
Yeah.
So you kind of do that, and it makes it a little bit tighter there. And then one thing that's really cool is in the 2-player game, you have to actually win areas twice to be able to put a castle out and then stand it up and have it be worth points. And so you are incentivized. You have to be fighting. You can't just be like, I'm going to be in this one territory, you're in that one territory, and we both win. It's like, no, no, no. You have to be in conflict.
Yeah. Well, and on top of that, there is also, I believe, at least there's a dummy level you have to reach.
Yes, there is on the strength track.
On the strength track. So you can't just be like, I'm the only one here, I don't have to do anything. It's like, no, you still have to fight, even if you're kind of going against just like a threshold, basically.
You're incentivized in many ways to really participate and kind of do what you would do in a higher player count game where maybe you're forced to do that. That's really cool. One thing I enjoy in the higher player count versions is you're not going to be in every single battle in every single area, because you kind of want to make sure that you're doing things strategically.
You don't have that many troops.
You don't have that many troops. But one thing you can do is if you're not in the battles, you actually get to wager on who you think's going to win that battle based on the state of the board and everything like that. And so I love that even when I'm not in the battle, I have skin in the game.
Yeah, you still care about the battles that are going on. Yeah, our good friends Casey and Miguel, we were talking to them about One Does War. We were talking about how we've never played it at 2 because we were like, oh, it's probably really bad at 2. And they were like, we only like to play it at 2.
Yeah.
Because we can get like super in each other's faces. And we were like, it's good at 2. And they're like, no, it's really fun at 2. And we've played it since then. We're like, oh, this is really great. And so it's a game that from the outset you would think would be horrible at 2 players.
Right.
Like you'd want 5-player only, right? And it's like, no, it's really, really fun across the board. Yeah,
it's really cool. So that's number 9, Wonderland's War. They did it well with 2-player, making kind of area control battle stuff, which is, I don't think, very easy to do, so good on you.
Indeed. Number 8 is actually another Druid City game, so they're crushing this list.
Good on
and that is Tidal Blade's Banner Festival. So this is the kind of, it's not really a trick-taking game.
It's trick-taking-esque. It's a card-playing game.
Set in the Tidal Blades world, where now instead of being the Tidal Blades competing, you are merchants in the stands.
We're slanging sticks of meat.
Slanging sticks of meat and like hot wine and stuff.
Yeah.
And I was always saying, and all those old movies like Night Tales. It was like hot meat and hot wine.
Yeah, everything was hot because everything was sitting in the sun all day.
Exactly. It's just all room temperature.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, this is a game where you're playing out a card, and everyone's simultaneously revealing their cards. And depending on where you are, like in the arena, there's 4 different colors, like teal, yellow, orange, and purple.
Yeah.
And then where you are in like the purple area, purple is the strongest suit, and then the other 3 suits will essentially go down in strength.
A descending order. Yeah.
In descending order in a clockwise kind of fashion. And so if you play like a purple 9, that's the highest card in that particular part. But if you were essentially 1 to the left, purple is going to be the lowest one. So then a purple 9 is actually a pretty low card.
Yeah.
So it's very, very interesting in this way where, and then depending on where you end up in the trick, whether you win it, whether you end up in the middle, or whether you end up in the bottom, different stuff happens.
Yeah, so if you're like if you play the weakest card, each card has an ability, you get to trigger the ability of that card, which might be really cool. If you're in the middle, you get to put a couple tokens out onto these docks that are leading away from the kind of central arena, which is a little bit of kind of area control stuff. And if you have the highest card, you get to race your little racer around to wherever the trade gate is, and you're trying to do laps around the board with your little wave racer. So you, at different points, want to have the highest card, the middle card, or the lowest card. It's all depending on what the game state is, and you may want to win, mid it, or lose the next hand. And what's really cool is it plays up to 5-player. And in a 3-player game and a 2-player game, you're basically going to have a dummy character. In a 3-player game and 2-player as well, you're going to flip 1 unused card face up. Which is kind of cool because it actually gives you a little bit of information. You know at least 1 card that's going to be played by the table, and they're not going to do anything other than helping assign, who's in what order. In a 2-player game, you're also going to, on top of that, put a card face down, which is a bit of hidden information. So it's like another player. So you're essentially always playing at least a 4-player game. So you can always kind of work out the person the highest priority, the people in the middle, and the person at the lowest priority, which is cool.
It's also one thing that's nice about this game. What I like about it is losing a trick isn't bad. Like Mikey said, like sometimes you want to lose a trick, sometimes you want
especially
to be
if you lose a trick with a high valued card.
Yes, if you can lose a trick with a 9, that's super powerful. And it's like one of those things where this is one of those games where you might not always get what you want, but you're always going to get something good.
Yeah.
Like there's no bad, like, oh, this was worthless.
There's never a wasted turn.
Yeah, exactly. And so 2 players, again, it's probably still best like at 4, but it scales really well amongst all of them.
Yeah.
And it's really, really cool. And it's like, and trick-taking games are tough to scale a lot of times because they just get too hard otherwise. And this one's really, really good. It's got an interesting way to scale it.
Yeah, and I like that those lower player count games, it gives you some information. So it just creates a different kind of mind game of like, well, I know this much, but I don't know what you're doing. How am I going to work with that? So I think it does a pretty good job for that kind of game, like a simultaneous selection game. It does like the dummy character pretty well, I think.
Yeah, indeed. That's so number 8, Tidal Blades Banner Festival. Let's get number 7.
What a wonderful world. It's a wonderful world. It's number 7.
It's a good game.
That's why I did that perfect impersonation.
Perfect.
This is a card drafting game, card drafting engine building game where you are in the near-ish future, kind of a sci-fi punk future where we sort of got body mods and stuff, theme. And this is ultimately a game where you're going to be drafting out cards that are all different types of constructions you can do to kind of build up your empire. A lot of these cards are going to give you production of different cubes, which you're using to put onto cards to construct cards and things like that. And that's where the engine building comes in. And there's a whole bunch of things where you can basically get your cards drafted, and you're going to choose, do I want to put these into construction or do I want to recycle them, which are going to give you one resource of a certain color to help you complete those cards.
And you're never able to do all of them. So like recycling, you're going to recycle usually at least half of your cards.
At least half. And it really comes down to like, how do you find the sweet spot of not over recycling so you're not wasting resources, because that's not very efficient, but you also want to get your constructions done so you're not just sitting there doing nothing for you. And then as you build up more of those cards, you start producing more and more resources every round. And then a lot of the cards come down to sort of set collection elements, where for every green card you've constructed, you might get 2 points, or for every one of the financier tokens you've scored, you'll get a bonus points. Now they're worth 2 instead of 1, and on and on and on. There's all sorts of synergies. I do not know how to score points in this game.
It's true.
But
Mike's not very good at
it's a card drafting game that works really well because you can play, I think, up to 7 with the expansion, 5 with the base game. You can go all the way down to soloing it. And it just works well because you're dealing out cards and you're just passing them around.
And any kind of simultaneous game like that, like 7 Wonders you can throw on there too, because it's like the gameplay doesn't really, other than just thinking time, the gameplay doesn't change too much.
No.
And the game
you don't have to remove anything.
Yeah, it doesn't really change that much. And it's just like, from solo all the way up through, again, if you're playing 7, it's really, really good. It's by far my favorite like drafting kind of engine building game right now. Really, I love it so much. And like we've played it at 2 a bunch. I recently played it at 5, the full player count for the base game.
Soloed it last night.
Yeah, Mike sold it last night, and it's really, really good. It's just all the way through. Just an absolute banger of a drafting game. And it just works. It just works.
Works really well. With the expansion materials, depending on the player count, you're going to deal out a certain amount of each of the types of cards. So it just kind of works again at those different player counts. You kind of keep the splits of the types of cards even and all that jazz. And it just works great. And you're going to see another game that's basically simultaneous play. That's a great way to kind of deal with different player counts, because you're just kind of doing your own thing anyway, all at the same time.
Indeed. So that is It's a Wonderful World number 7. Let's get number 6.
So good.
Number 6 is when we first played this with our friend Marty. One of the things he mentioned is like it plays. He's like 85. He was like, it plays really good at all the player counts, and that's exactly how he sounded.
And he was like, and I was also at the World's Fair 1893.
My man was
almost
old.
He was almost there. That's not even just like a joke on the old. Like the homeboy was an octogenarian for real.
Yes, real talk.
And mad into the Kickstarter game.
Yes.
What a legend.
Always buying
Marty the One-Man Party. Anyway.
Marty the One-Man Party. But he introduced the World's Fair 1893. And he told us, it plays, one thing that's good about it is it plays really, really well. This is a game where you're at the World's Fair 1893, obviously. And you are essentially putting out your supporters, and you're trying to gain control of the different areas. So like agriculture, electricity, because that was like a new thing.
It was this newfangled thing, electricity. Tesla's running around.
Manufacturing, he's got his coils on his back. Make his hair stand up and stuff. So it's like these 5 different areas of the board, basically. You're trying to put your supporters out. It's an area control game. Again, area control games a lot of times don't really work that well at many different player counts, unless with some really different scaling on the board. And the game, the timing scales for 2 players, and 3 players and 4. You essentially, the game will time out at different times depending, but the actual game itself doesn't change that much.
Not really.
But just because this is a game where you're putting out your supporters, and there's a lot of you being able to move your supporters different places, move other people's supporters out of certain places. There's so many different ways to manipulate the board that it just works at all different player counts, because you're always able to just get in each other's way and fight for stuff, because you really, really need to gain control of these territories to get the chips and stuff.
And it still feels really competitive for space. The rewards that you gain for at the end of the round for having the most supporters in a certain area do change and stuff like that. So it's, again, it helps you get away from the problem of like, I just happen to be over here by myself because there's only 2 of us, so I'm going to get all this stuff. You're like, no, it scales that down, so it doesn't become this like runaway leader thing. It does things to stoke competitiveness within the 5 different areas. And I think it's partially why this works well at different player counts is you do scale out the length of the rounds using the Ferris wheel and stuff like that. And it's only, I think, an area control game that goes to 4 players. So it's not one of these ones where you're going to have a ton of people playing the game, period. So it does work well because it's kind of just in a more confined space anyway.
And like, when you win, or like rather when you go to an area, you get cards from that area, which are all the different colors of the board. And then, but you only get to turn those are all like patents, kind of ideas and stuff like that. And you only get to turn them into like actual exhibits at the fair unless you win that area. So like, I think manufacturing is red, or I think it's silver. And it's like, So for you to turn a silver card into a silver chit, which means that's a true exhibit,
something that's
you have to
actually worth
win
something.
that area, or at least come in like second place in that area. So it benefits you. You have to go to these different areas.
Yes,
you have to get
be
each other's way
competing.
because that's how you're going to score your points, which is through these big sets. And so, because getting the cards doesn't do anything.
Yeah.
You need to turn those cards into actual exhibits. And so the whole game is based around like, you need to go over to this area. You can't just be like, I'm just going to park in this area and sit there. It's like, good luck, you're not going to do anything.
No, yeah.
You need to spread out.
You have to be
because you
competing.
want full sets.
Yeah.
And so it's just really, really good, and it just works at all player counts. We played it somewhat recently at 3, and we're like, yep, it's great. We played it recently at 2, yep, it's great. It's wonderful.
It's wonderful.
It's just...
It's the World's Fair. I was about to say it's a wonderful world.
It's not that. We're not talking about that game.
No, but
game's dead to us.
It's great that I love that you get all these cards, and the cards themselves are not valuable.
They're not. They're worthless.
So you need to go do something with them.
Very,
very
very
patents can't stay in your brain. You got to make them into inventions. Nick, why are you in a referee outfit?
Because we're about to do an ad read for the World Series of Board Game. There's like game refs who are like, you can't do that. You can't play that bird.
That's true. They don't dress like that, but they do act in that way. Yes, the World Series of Board Game is something that's coming up this fall. You might have heard other people talk about it. This is something we talked about last year as we attended the first ever.
We did. It was cool.
Or the first of the current iteration, I should say, of the World Series of Board Gaming. It's happening September 24th through 28th of this very fall of ours upcoming.
Indeed, and you can sign up right now. There are some stay and play packages where you get to stay at the hotel that it's at in Vegas. It's in glitzy Las Vegas.
It gets you entered into, I think, 4 events as well. So it's the best kind of bang for your buck because you get your stay at a rate that is much cheaper than typical hotels in Vegas. That's what we did last time that we were there.
We both competed last year, and because it's a tournament, you might worry that oh my God, it's gonna be everyone's gonna be super mean and serious. They weren't. Everyone was super
really
nice.
Friendly environment.
Really friendly. Everyone's rooting for each other when they went on, and then the rest of the time, it's just like a normal board game convention. The Dice Tower West Library is there, so you're just sitting around playing board games with people. It's really cool.
Yeah, it's a really nice, fun, open, chill environment just to hang out, play games, learn some games from people who are really good at them. There's booths to check out and stuff like that.
I said booths, not
booths.
There's booths.
You're in Vegas, so there's booths to check out. It is Las Vegas after all. So check out the description of the video for links to all that. We'd really appreciate the support by clicking on those. Helps us out a little bit too. And thank you to the World Series of Board Gaming for sponsoring this top 10.
Our number 5 kind of runs into the same thing that Tidal Blade's Banner Festival did, whereas you're always playing a 4-player game.
Yes. Kind of. This is Teotihuacan.
Sorry, I should mention that. Yeah.
No, but it's good. So this game does create traffic on the board.
Yes.
So main thing with Teotihuacan, you are using your little workers and you're going around gaining resources, turning those resources to build a great pyramid. You're decorating that pyramid. You're working up the Avenue of the Dead by building buildings and all sorts of stuff like that. One thing that comes into this is the kind of resource of cacao where you are spending and gaining cacao to feed your workers and stuff as they go around, they're leveling up and stuff like that. So the cost for doing an action is dependent on how many different colored dice are on that action board when you arrive.
Yeah.
So if we're playing a 2-player game, I think the first time I ever played this on my own, I didn't remember that was the rule.
That'd be such an easy
It
game.
becomes way too open. You're like, no, I never have to spend this cacao. This is weird. You're supposed to play with all 4 colored dice on the board at all times so that there is that kind of competition for space and that management of the cacao. The nice thing about this is for every era of the game, there's 3 kind of rounds in the game. You draw out tiles or in the new version a card that will tell you where to put those dummy workers.
So they're gonna move.
They live there for that entire era, that third of the game. So the thing that's nice is you kind of realize man, the space where I gather wood has both of those dummy characters.
Rough.
That's going to be expensive this round. And so you have to kind of now plan around
you're adapting,
that. And the fact that they're not moving around every turn is nice because that'd be too much to manage. So it hits that sweet spot of 3 times a game, I just got to move those dice. Cool, they're sitting there. It creates interesting decisions where I'm like, okay, maybe I'll put off working on the pyramid because it's just too expensive to do right now. Let me go over here and do this instead. So it creates interesting choices, and it maintains that kind of tightness over the resources as you're going through the game.
Yeah,
regardless of your player count.
It's really important. You need that. Otherwise, the game would be way too open.
It'd be too open.
And if you're playing with a 3-player game, then you'll have 1 dummy color. If you're playing a 2-player game, you have 2 dummy colors. You're always essentially kind of playing a 4-player game, which this game needs that. You have to be playing a 4-player game for it to kind of work. And so they just find a very easy way to do it. And so it just scales really, really well. The solo I hear is very good. Board and Dice's solos are a little too robust for us. But
Hurts
I know
my brain. David Tursi is too smart.
David Tursi is way too smart for us. But the solos also works really well in Teotihuacan from what we hear. And so, yeah, Teotihuacan is, again, another game where you're kind of always playing the full game, and it needs it, and it just works really, really well.
Yep. It keeps all the heart of Teotihuacan in place. That's why it's our number 5.
Number 4 is another simultaneous selection game, and this is Planet Unknown. This is a game where it's 1 to 6, and it plays super, super well at all of those player counts.
Yes.
Because this is a simultaneous selection game, and there's also not really much player interaction in the game. But basically, you are terraforming a planet, so everyone has their own planet, everyone has their own corporation, and there's a big lazy Susan in the middle with a whole bunch of different tiles on it that are going to be different landscapes if you put on the tile.
Yep.
But basically, whoever's the active player gets to move the lazy Susan so they can put the tiles in front of them, the ones that they want to draft.
The depot.
The depot, and then everyone else just has to take a tile from the one that's pointed to them. But everyone does that simultaneously. Everyone then grabs a tile, puts it on their board, moves their tracks, but everyone just does that on their own. So this game, a 2-player game of this versus a 6-player game, this really isn't like different.
No. And the thing that's really cool about this and why we enjoy the scaling is not that it's just not different, but it creates logistical things to make it easier. Where that lazy Susan is a fun, novel thing, but it also makes the game easy to play because this is facing me. That's the tiles I can take. I can choose one of those tiles. Simple, easy. It also scales in terms of if you have people at different ability levels or familiarity with the game. This game, you have basic corporations, basic planets. You have asymmetric corporations, asymmetric planets. And anyone in any game can play with anything. I could play with both of them are asymmetric. You have both basic, mixes of the two. Everyone can make that decision for themselves. And if you wanted to even the playing field a little bit, there's different kind of difficulties of the different corporations and planets. And if I know this game really well, you've never played it, I'm going to choose some harder ones and kind of balance the game a little bit that way. So it does all these different things. You can basically bend this game in any which way you want. And then it makes it super simple to employ and
there's also kind of like objectives that you're racing for, but you're only racing with your neighbors. So like it doesn't, what that person over there is doing doesn't really matter.
Doesn't matter.
So like again, whether you're playing with 3 people or 6 people, it doesn't make a difference in terms of all of that. And it just works really, really well. And there's a couple of games that are kind of like this where you're kind of doing key flow is a game we talk about a lot that does a similar thing where it's like you're all drafting at the same time. You can't really affect each other very much. So you can kind of do, but Planet Unknown is just so good. But I think your point of like, you can scale the difficulty based off of like newer players can just play on basic stuff and it just doesn't matter. It doesn't affect anybody. And it works so, so well.
You could make this game work, I swear, for any group of people you have. You could figure out a way to do it. As long as they like
board games.
And it's nice and easy. Again, the Lazy Susan is actually really a brilliant stroke.
It's a gimmick that
works so well.
Yeah, it works. Exactly. So Planet Unknown, so good. Number 4 scales really well. 1 through 6. The solo is really, really fun too. So 1 through 6, Planet Unknown. Let's get number 3. Number 3, I at first was kind of like, really? But then you brought it up, how well it scales, and that's the Crew Mission Deep Sea specifically. Yes.
So the Crew Mission Deep Sea is a trick-taking game, which is based on the Crew Quest for Planet 9, which is
also
the first
scales
one.
Okay.
It's okay. It has some problems. So the Crew Mission Deep Sea is a trick-taking game. Typically, you want 3-4 people, and I would say the same is also for this game. But it does work really well to different player counts because they have basically tasks, missions you're going on, things that you need to fulfill in order to win this particular hand of the crew, this mission that you're going on. So you have these different tasks and stuff, and it might be as simple like, Nick needs to win the blue 7.
That's it.
You have to be the one that collects that card somehow, some way.
Game,
It's a co-op game. And there's ones that are more difficult and less difficult. And one thing that from the first version of the Crew to this, they did really well is they took into account player count. Because certain of those missions at a 2-player game will be absolutely simple. At a 5-player game are going to be a nightmare. And maybe things will be vice versa. Or weirdly, at a 3-player count game, this is actually going to be trickier than you think. So now you're given basically a generic, like, we need 7 difficulty worth of tasks. We're going to see, okay, we're playing a 3-player game. On the backs of all those little task cards, they have what the difficulty level is for the player count you're at.
For every player count.
So now it just does a better job of considering who you're sitting with at the table and kind of managing. So this thing is going to be really hard. So this is a 3 difficulty because of the player count we're at. I thought that was like the most smart, and I don't know how you math that out and figure it out.
Gosh, who knows?
I think it's genius.
Because the original, you're just doing a certain amount of tasks, but this one, the amount of tasks you do Depends.
Might vary.
It's kind of on the luck of the draw / how many difficulty. Because if you're doing 5 difficulty, you could be doing 5 level 1 tasks.
Yeah.
Or you could do 1 level 5 task. It just depends on what
that big deck of cards.
On that
and
big
the player
deck
count.
of cards. But again, at different, you could do the exact same thing, 5 difficulty, but with different player counts, the amount of tasks are gonna be totally different.
Yeah.
So it's like it just really scales super, super well because you're like, oh, it's always gonna work for whatever player count you're at.
Yeah.
And it's just, yeah, it's such a brilliant way to do it.
Yeah, because the first crew kind of hit on, I think it, like they were saying at 5 player it's really hard.
Really hard, yeah.
And at like 3 player it's a little too easy and open. And so they did that where they're like, okay, now it's always going to be a similar difficulty, different player counts because the way those tasks kind of self-scale, which I thought was just like, I've never seen something like that. I thought that was super cool.
Yeah, it's super, super cool, especially for trick taking, which again tends to not scale very well. That is number 3. The crew mission DC, super, super good. Let's get number 2.
Number 2 is Le Havre.
Yeah.
We think Le Havre scales pretty dang well. You can play from 1 to 5 players.
Pretty much all Uwe games scale pretty well, but Le Havre is legitimately different at 2 than it is, or at 1 too, than it is at 5. So Le Havre goes 1 to 5, and basically the lower the player count, you're going to get to do a lot more stuff. Like
in each individual round, you're going to get more activations.
Exactly. Like you're going to get to go either 2 or 3 turns basically.
Yeah.
Before you have to then feed your people. But because you can do more, you have to feed way more people. Like you have to put aside so much more food. Whereas a 5-player game, you're only getting 1 turn per round, and then you have to feed your people again. But you don't have to feed them nothing.
Way down.
The feeding your people is really what scales in the game to the point where, like, if you're playing a 2-player game versus a 5-player game, it feels very, very different.
Yeah, and I know for some people, like, they won't always love that, but I just think it's really interesting because basically every time it's your turn, you're going to move your ship to the front line. You're leapfrogging each other as you're going through this little harbor. I think there's 7 spaces in the harbor.
Something like that, yeah.
So in a 2-player game, you're either getting 3 or 4 actions. In a 5-player game, again, like you said, most of the time you're getting 1. You might get 2.
Yeah.
And so the fact that they kind of Uwe figured out how to scale that down and make the challenge of kind of feeding your people less in those higher player count games, but you also have to try to think of like, okay, I only have this 1 turn, how do I maximize and do that, is a very different kind of puzzle to have to solve. I just think it's kind of neat that they pull it off and do it that way. If you play a solo game, the food costs are up here, but you're doing 7 actions every round. So it's like, yeah, you should be able to feed your people if you're doing that. So I just really think it's an interesting, albeit kind of funky, weird way to go about the scaling, but I just think it's, I don't know, maybe it's just novelty or whatever. I think it's really neat. I think it's just really fascinating the way that you have to change what you think of, but it keeps the kind of tension over making sure you feed your people pretty much the same throughout the different player counts, which I think is pretty cool.
It does. It just scales very well. Most Uwe games do, but this one, most Uwe games, it's like, there's just a different board or something else. But this one, it's like, oh, it actually feels pretty darn different. That's Le Havre, number 2. But let's get to number 1.
Number 1 is always the thing we think of that makes us think of this topic.
That's probably why it's number 1. Not necessarily because it's the... It's
I think
very,
it's cool,
very good.
man.
It's very, very good. But this is a game where we're like, wow, we'd never seen games like scale before. Really.
No.
This is number 1.
This is Small World.
Indeed.
So Small World is an area control game through and through.
Does not work.
You are trying to get troops on a map that are different, different
fantasy races,
fantasy races and stuff that are all going to have a kind of an ability attached to them. Some of them can fly or they can tunnel and different stuff like that. They give you different sort of weird combinations.
Yep.
So this is an area control game. You need to be in contention for space. That's something we've seen a couple other times where how do you create that at a lower player count game?
Yeah.
This one, again, was maybe the earliest example we saw a game that truly scales in a big bad way. In Small World, for every different player count, you have a literal different map that you play on.
2 through 5,
2 through 5, it's always a different map. So that it's always going to be perfectly dialed in for that player count in terms of how many regions there are and stuff like that. It's all kind of dialed in, and when I saw that, that blew my mind.
Yeah, we were just like, whoa, there's different boards.
Yeah, they also changed the amount of rounds you have and stuff like that, so I was like, I've never seen something like that. I feel so catered to as a 2-player, pretty much exclusive person. It was really cool to have a game like this where you're like, this is actually really viable and really fun to play because all the tension's right there for space and making those decisions like when do I put my race into decline and bring in a new one, like all those decisions.
Because the whole point of Small World is that the world is too small for everybody, and that's why you're fighting for land. But it's like if you only had one board, it's like that literally takes away the entire point of the game.
Yeah.
So they gave you a new board, and it's so nice because I mean like some area control games will just be like, oh, you're just not playing with this region.
Cover that area or
like Power Grid, where it's like this whole part of the map. You're just not.
They're like, just don't
ignore half the board.
I'm like, well, I forget at some point. I'm like, why are you in Florida? I'm like, I don't know if that Tallahassee was cool. They're like, that's off limits. I'm like, I don't know.
Exactly. But this one is like, you get another board. I understand like it's more money to give people more boards. I understand that. But it's just like, it was just so cool. And the fact there's more rounds.
Yeah.
We were just like, whoa. And it does. And it plays really, really good at all those because, again, the world is just too darn small for all those different player counts. Yeah. And it's just like, it's just a blast. And it's really, really fun at 2, 3, 4, and 5. And it's so, so good.
Yeah. And I feel like this game still is maybe the game that's gone the most full send on scaling. Again, different maps, 4 player counts all in the same box.
Yeah.
I think it's a boss move. I think it's a flex.
There's a couple of games like when Dake has different boards for different player counts. Nice. But again, area control games. They're like, no, we're going to give you different boards. And it plays great at 2. It could be on this list easily. Like when Dake is great for that exact reason. Yeah. But Small World was really the first one we ever saw that did it. So we're just like, it's just so damn good.
Got to give that love to Small World. So that's our list of games that we think scale really well. Now, I'll tell you this. These aren't the only games we've talked about on this topic. We have a Patreon. You might have heard about it. We'd love it for you to support it. I'm sorry I got aggressive there.
Wow, so
the point is, we've talked about 10 more games that we think scale really well. That's over on our Patreon for patrons only. You can go watch right now. Become a patron today, please.
Indeed, indeed. And that is going to be the end of our list. Thank you so much. Let us know down in the comments below what other games you think scale really, really well. And just let us know because we're always looking for more games. 2 to 5. Tell me what games are good at those player counts because we always need them.
Absolutely. Big shouts out to World Series of Board Gaming for sponsoring this top 10. We really appreciate it. Again, check out the link in the description of this video to get your tickets now because those stay and play packages are going fast. And you don't want to miss out on that because it's going to save you literally a butt ton of money. So check that out right now.
Indeed. Until next time, we'll see you later. Bye.
Thank you so much for watching that top 10. A big shout out to World Series of Board Game for sponsoring this one. Want to give a big shout out to our channel sponsors as a whole, Restoration Games, Lucky Duck Games, and Board Game Geek. Want to give a big shout out to y'all for watching this and make sure to check out the supplemental video over on our Patreon. Have a wonderful rest of your day.